Let go of the door or I'll break your fingers. I swear to God, Zola, you and the brat are not my problem anymore. The words didn't just hang in the air, they felt violently shoved down my throat, mixing with the freezing November rain that was currently blinding me. He kicked my shin. It wasn't a warning tap. It was a vicious, measured strike, with the steel toe of his heavy leather work boot, delivered hard enough to crack the tibia. A sickening hollow pop echoed beneath the drumming roar of the storm. The physical shock of it was a blinding white flash behind my eyes. The breath evaporated from my lungs. I fell backward, my grip slipping from the slick, wet metal of the truck's door handle. My bare knees slammed into the oily, freezing concrete of a Shell station on Elvis Presley Boulevard. The impact drove sharp, stinging gravel straight through the thin fabric of my clothes and into my skin. I was 29 years old. I was wearing oversized, threadbare flannel pajama pants that were instantly soaked through with iridescent puddles of gasoline and rainwater. My top was a torn, heather gray t-shirt that offered zero protection against the biting 38-degree wind. I had no purse, I had no phone, I had no coat. The wind was howling, a low guttural shriek that whipped the torrential rain sideways across the desolate, flickering neon-lit parking lot. It smelled of ozone, wet asphalt, and the sharp, nauseating tang of spilled diesel fuel. And I was holding my 5-year-old daughter, Ivy. She felt impossibly light in my arms, like a bundle of hollow bird bones wrapped in a damp fleece blanket. She was wheezing. It was a terrible mechanical sound, like a crushed paper straw trying to draw air. Her tiny, fragile chest was heaving with violent, erratic spasms. I could feel the frantic hummingbird flutter of her heart against my own collarbone. When a flash of lightning illuminated the parking lot, I saw her face. Her lips were turning a terrifying dusky shade of blue, the color of a bruised plum. "Wyatt, please!" I screamed, the wind tearing the words from my mouth before they could even reach him. "She can't breathe! Please!" Wyatt didn't look at me. His jaw was set in a rigid, furious line. He reached out and slammed the heavy metal truck door shut. The concussive thud vibrated through the concrete beneath my bleeding knees. I heard the heavy electronic clunk of the locks engaging. "Wyatt!" I slammed my palm against the wet glass of the passenger window. "Open the door!" He shifted the truck into drive. He didn't even cast a sideways glance toward the window. His heavy all-terrain tires squealed against the slick pavement, gripping the wet asphalt and peeling out into the dark, humid Memphis night. The red glow of his taillights bled into the rain, shrinking into nothingness, leaving us completely, utterly alone in the suffocating dark. I pulled Ivy tighter against my chest, wrapping my body around hers to shield her from the biting wind. The cold was a living, breathing entity, sinking its teeth into my bones, but beneath the freezing rain, my blood was beginning to run hot with a quiet, terrifying clarity. 2 hours later, under the harsh, fluorescent surgical lights of an emergency room bay, a paramedic named Luis would find Ivy's blue rescue inhaler. It wasn't lost in the truck. It wasn't dropped on the floor mats. Luis found it sitting at the very bottom of the black plastic gas station trash can next to pump number 4, resting atop a pile of soggy cigarette butts and discarded lottery tickets. Wyatt hadn't just forgotten it in the chaos of the night. He had intentionally, methodically thrown it away before he pushed us out of the cab. He wanted us completely helpless. He wanted me stranded in the freezing rain with a suffocating child. He thought I would break. He thought I would panic, scream at the gas station attendant, cause a massive scene, and finally prove to the world that I was the crazy, hysterical, unstable woman he had been telling everyone I was for the past 6 months. But as I knelt there in the oily puddle, rocking my gasping daughter, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, because Wyatt Vance had absolutely no idea what was meticulously sewn inside the pink nylon lining of Ivy's little backpack. To understand why I didn't beg for my life, why I didn't shatter into a million pieces on that wet concrete, and why that brutal freezing night at the gas station was actually the definitive beginning of his absolute destruction, you need to understand exactly who I am. My name is Zola Vance. I am a dog groomer at a dilapidated, neon-lit strip mall clinic called Paws and Claws in East Memphis. It is not a glamorous life. The air inside the clinic is perpetually thick with steam and the suffocating humidity of a Florida swamp. I spend 8 exhausting hours a day wrestling with anxious German shepherds, manually expressing foul smelling anal glands, clipping the thick black nails of aggressive biting terriers, and coming home every single night smelling deeply of wet corn chips, copper blood, and medicinal oatmeal shampoo. I don't have a college degree. I don't have a safety net or a trust fund. I don't have a vast, sprawling network of influential friends in high places who can make my problems disappear with a single phone call. What I do have is a master's degree in survival. I grew up deep inside the forgotten, rusted machinery of the Tennessee foster care system. If you haven't experienced it firsthand, words usually fall short, but let me paint you a vivid picture. It smells, uniformly, like industrial bleach, aggressively masking the underlying stench of boiled cabbage and stale urine. It sounds like the heavy rhythmic thud of an angry adult's boots walking down a creaky hallway at 3 in the morning, a sound that makes your stomach instantly drop into your shoes. It feels like the rough, static charged plastic of a black heavy duty trash bag. It feels like packing your entire existence into that bag with exactly 10 minutes' notice because a tired social worker decided the state is moving you to another zip code before the sun comes up. When you grow up like that, bouncing from one overcrowded, hostile environment to another, you do not develop the skills normal children do. You don't learn how to network at parties. You don't learn how to balance a portfolio or ask for help. You learn how to read the atmospheric pressure of a room in 3 seconds flat. You learn how to calculate the exact level of an adult's intoxication or rage simply by the specific metallic way their keys jingle as they fumble with the front door lock. You learn to memorize exits. You become a ghost. You learn to breathe silently. You observe everything and you say absolutely nothing. I had exactly one good foster mother in all my agonizing years bouncing through the system. Her name was Mrs. Quincy. Mrs. Quincy was a tough, deeply cynical, chain smoking woman in her late 60s who kept a heavy, splintered wooden baseball bat leaning casually by the front door. Her house was old, settling into the Memphis soil with groans and creaks, and the air inside was a permanent, hazy blue from her Pall Mall cigarettes. But despite her rough exterior, she baked the most incredible, gooey, cheap boxed brownies on Sunday afternoons. The smell of that artificial chocolate was the closest thing to heaven I had ever known. More importantly, she was the first and only person who ever looked at me and saw a living, breathing human child instead of a bi-weekly, state-funded paycheck. I vividly remember sitting at her sticky, yellowed Formica kitchen table when I was 16 years old. The winter draft was rattling the single-pane windows. I was sobbing uncontrollably, the kind of deep, ugly, chest-heaving sobs that give you a migraine. A popular girl at my high school had cornered me in the locker room, stolen my only winter coat, a puffy navy blue thing I had found at a Goodwill, and laughed directly in my face while her friends called me a trash bag orphan. Mrs. Quincy didn't offer a hug. She didn't offer empty platitudes about how things would get better. She simply walked over, her worn slippers scuffing against the linoleum, and slid a warm, chipped ceramic plate of freshly baked brownies toward me. She sat down opposite me, struck a match, and lit a menthol cigarette. "You're making a mess of your face, Zola," she said, her voice like grinding gravel. "She took my coat," I choked out, wiping my nose on the sleeve of my thin sweater. "It's freezing outside, Mrs. Quincy. I don't have another one." I asked for it back, and she just laughed at me. "And you think crying at my table is gonna magically put that coat back on your shoulders?" "No," I whispered, staring down at the steam rising from the chocolate. I don't know what to do. I'm powerless. They can just do whatever they want to me." Mrs. Quincy leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. She took a long, slow drag of her cigarette and exhaled a thick, pungent cloud of blue smoke toward the water-stained ceiling. She looked at me with eyes that had seen decades of broken children. "Listen to me, Zola, and listen close," she said, tapping her ash into a glass tray. "A cornered animal doesn't cry. Crying just tells the predator they've won. A cornered animal gets quiet. It watches the locks, and it waits for the cage to open. When the moment comes, you don't bark. You bite." I stopped crying. The tears literally dried on my cheeks, tightening my skin. I stared at her, absorbing the absolute chilling truth of her words. It wasn't about fairness, it was about strategy. I understand, I said softly. Good. Eat your brownie. I never forgot that afternoon. It became the foundational blueprint for my entire existence. I stopped complaining about the coat. I wore an extra sweater to school and kept my head down. 3 weeks later, the girl who stole it was sitting in the library, taking her crucial final exams. She was caught red handed, cheating because someone had anonymously, silently slipped her handwritten cheat sheet directly under the principal's office door with a note detailing exactly where she hid it during tests. I didn't brag. I didn't gloat to the other foster kids. I didn't even look in her direction as she was marched out of the building in tears, facing immediate suspension and a revoked college scholarship. I just sat at my usual table in the loud, echoing cafeteria, chewing my dry turkey sandwich, and watched the consequences unfold. That hypervigilance, that absolute sociopathic level of quiet observation, became my superpower. I noticed things, small, insignificant things, the kind of tiny, microscopic details that arrogant people think nobody ever sees. I notice when a crumpled gas receipt at the bottom of a trash can shows a zip code that doesn't match the route a person swore they drove. I notice when the ambient background noise on a supposedly late night at the office phone call sounds distinctly like the clinking silverware and low jazz of a restaurant instead of the hum of warehouse machinery. I notice the way a person's pupils dilate when they lie, the way they shift their weight, the way they over explain unnecessary details. That one defining trait about me, that invisible, silent observation, it is the exact singular reason this story ends with Wyatt Vance in stainless steel handcuffs. The seed of his ultimate destruction was planted exactly 47 days before he abandoned us at that freezing gas station. It was a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in early October. The Memphis heat was oppressive, hanging in the air like a wet wool blanket. I was in the driveway, vacuuming the interior of Wyatt's pristine black Silverado truck. The air inside the cab smelled of stale black ice air freshener and old leather. I was pushing the plastic nozzle of the shop vac deep into the tight, dark crevice between the passenger seat and the massive center console. The vacuum choked, making a high-pitched whining sound. I reached my fingers into the dark gap to pull out whatever was blocking it. My fingers brushed against something hard and plastic. I pulled it out into the bright sunlight. It was a cheap, bright yellow plastic keychain shaped like a cartoon giraffe. The paint on one of its large cartoonish eyes was slightly chipped. I sat back on my heels, the roar of the vacuum suddenly fading into background noise. I stared at the giraffe resting in my palm. The plastic felt warm, heated by the afternoon sun baking through the windshield. My heart did a strange, slow thump against my ribs. I didn't own a yellow giraffe. I didn't like trinkets. Ivy didn't own a yellow giraffe. She was terrified of them after a trip to the zoo where one tried to eat her paper map. And Wyatt? Wyatt despised clutter. He was a minimalist who kept his keys on a sleek, matte black carabiner. He would never buy a cheap, gaudy plastic toy. I rubbed my thumb over the chipped paint. I didn't run inside and scream. I didn't hold it up to his face and demand an explanation. I didn't even let my breathing change. I just slipped the warm plastic toy deep into the front pocket of my denim shorts, turned the vacuum back on, and started paying very, very close attention to my husband. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the depth of his betrayal, let me tell you exactly how I ended up sitting in the passenger seat of that black truck in the first place. I met Wyatt when I was 23 years old. It was a Tuesday evening, and the sky had opened up, dumping sheets of torrential, freezing rain across the city. I was standing in the flooded parking lot of a cheap grocery store, staring in absolute hollow despair at the front left tire of my beat-up, rusted Honda Civic. It was completely flat, the rim resting on the wet asphalt. I was soaked to the bone. My cheap canvas sneakers were filled with icy water. I had no umbrella, no family to call, and I knew for an absolute fact that I had exactly $14.32 to my name in my checking account. A tow truck was not an option. I was shivering so violently my teeth were audibly clicking together when a massive, pristine black Silverado pulled up beside me. The passenger window rolled down smoothly, revealing a man in a sharp, perfectly tailored gray suit. The interior of his truck smelled like warm, expensive leather and roasted coffee. He smiled. It was a brilliant, blinding smile that could have successfully sold ice to an Eskimo. "Looks like you need a jack and a dry jacket," he called out over the drumming rain. I wiped a sheet of cold water from my eyes, hugging my arms tightly across my chest. "I don't have any money to pay for a tow or a mechanic." "Didn't ask for money," he said, shifting his massive truck into park. He didn't hesitate. He popped his door open and stepped directly out into the deluge. "I'm Wyatt." "Zola," I stammered, watching the rain instantly plaster his expensive dress shirt to his shoulders. "You're going to completely ruin your suit." "Suit's dry, Zola," he said, walking to the bed of his truck to retrieve a heavy hydraulic jack. "You look like you're about to catch pneumonia standing out here." He changed the tire in the pouring rain. He ruined the $400 jacket. He got mud all over his expensive leather shoes. When he finished, he wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, smiled that devastating smile again, and handed me his glossy business card. He worked in regional sales for a massive logistics company. "Get home safe, Zola," he said. "Get some hot tea." He didn't ask for my phone number. He didn't linger awkwardly waiting for praise. He just got in his truck and drove away. It was, without a doubt, the most brilliantly executed, flawlessly performed savior routine I had ever witnessed in my entire life. And I fell for it. God, I fell for it so incredibly hard. When you spend your entire life being passed around, being unwanted, feeling like a burden to every adult who looks at you, the first person who willingly volunteers to stand in the freezing rain to help you looks exactly like a superhero. I called the number on the card the next day to thank him. He asked me to dinner. The rest was a blur of romance that felt like a movie montage. The first 2 years were beautiful. I won't lie to you and pretend they weren't. We rented a small, cozy house with a wraparound porch. On warm summer evenings, we would sit on the back steps, eating messy pulled pork sandwiches from Central BBQ. The air would smell heavily of hickory smoke and sweet vinegar sauce, and we would just listen to the cicadas hum their loud vibrating song in the humid night air. When I found out I was pregnant with Ivy, Wyatt cried. Real tears. He spent 3 entire exhausting weekends in the garage, building a wooden crib entirely from scratch. I would watch him from the kitchen window. He sanded the raw pine wood until his knuckles were raw and his fingers literally bled, ensuring there wasn't a single splinter that could hurt our baby. He painted it a soft, beautiful, calming lavender. The house smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, and to me, it smelled like absolute security. I thought I had finally found my home. I thought the universe, in its infinite cosmic balance, was finally paying me back for the miserable, lonely childhood I had endured. I was an absolute idiot. The red flags didn't appear all at once. Monsters rarely show you their teeth on the first date. The toxicity bleeds into your life like a single drop of dark food coloring in a clear glass of water, swirling, spreading so slowly and beautifully at first, until one day you take a sip and realize you're drinking pure poison. The very first glaring warning sign was his older sister, Yvonne. Yvonne was 34, had been aggressively divorced twice, and possessed the moral compass of a rusty weather vane in a hurricane. She worked as the lead receptionist at a high-end, obscenely expensive dental clinic in Germantown. She was constantly covered in a thick layer of orange fake tan and smelled overpoweringly of cheap floral perfume and hairspray. From the moment we met, she looked at me like I was a diseased cockroach that had somehow crawled up out of her pristine sink drain. Her long, sharp acrylic nails were always clicking aggressively against her glowing phone screen every time I dared to speak in her presence. And Wyatt absolutely worshipped her. To him, Yvonne could do no wrong. Consequently, Yvonne constantly had emergencies that required Wyatt's immediate, undivided attention. A flat tire on the interstate, a broken pipe under her sink, a sudden mysterious panic attack. These emergencies always, without fail, happened at 9 o'clock at night, always on a weekend, always when Wyatt and I had plans. "She's my sister, Zola," he would sigh, grabbing his keys off the counter as our dinner grew cold. "I'm all she has. Don't be jealous. It's an ugly look on you." "I'm not jealous," I'd reply, trying to keep my voice perfectly level. It's just our anniversary, Wyatt. And she's having a crisis. Be reasonable. I told myself it was just intense sibling loyalty. I shoved the unease down into my stomach. It was nothing. Then came the phone habit. It started subtly. We were having dinner at a cheap, brightly lit Mexican restaurant on our third anniversary. The air smelled of sizzling onions and stale margarita mix. I was telling him about a difficult dog I had groomed that day when I watched him pull his phone from his pocket and place it face down on the sticky, salsa stained table. 5 minutes later, it buzzed loudly against the wood. Wyatt didn't just look at it, he practically lunged for it. He snatched it up with lightning speed, angled his body and the glowing screen sharply away from me, typed furiously with both thumbs, and immediately shoved it deep into his front pocket. Everything okay? I asked, a piece of a tortilla chip pausing halfway to my mouth. Fine, he said, his jaw visibly tight, a muscle ticking near his ear. Just work. Warehouse issues. At 9 on a Friday night? Logistics never sleeps, Zola, he snapped, his tone suddenly sharp and defensive. Can we just enjoy dinner? I nodded slowly. I chewed my food. But the ghost inside me, my foster care superpower, was already awake and whispering in my ear. The hair on my arm stood up. Regional sales managers do not handle warehouse inventory crises at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. The fracture, the exact devastating moment the glass of our marriage actually shattered into a million irreparable pieces, happened on a brutally hot Thursday afternoon in late August. Yvonne had graciously asked me to clean the interior of her massive white SUV. She claimed she was far too busy with her dental clinic duties and threw a crumpled $50 bill at my chest. Since you're so naturally good at cleaning up filthy messes at that dog place, she sneered, her lip curling in disgust. Make sure you get the floor mats. I spilled an iced coffee. I desperately needed the extra grocery money for Ivy's expensive asthma medication, so I swallowed my pride, took the money, and did it. The garage was an absolute oven. Sweat stung my eyes as I scrubbed the sticky brown coffee stains out of the passenger floor mat. The smell of Armor All and hot leather was nauseating. I reached my hand deep under the passenger seat to grab a stray French fry. My fingers brushed against thick, high-quality paper. I pulled it out. It was a crisp, white envelope shoved far back against the metal seat tracks. It had the embossed gold foil logo of a prominent, highly expensive Memphis OBGYN clinic, printed neatly on the top left corner. I stopped breathing. The air in the garage suddenly felt too thick to inhale. Yvonne wasn't pregnant. She had bragged loudly at Thanksgiving about having her tubes tied 3 years ago so she could enjoy her freedom. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. I left oily streaks of chemical cleaner on the pristine leather seats as I carefully, hesitantly slid the heavy paper out of the unsealed envelope. It was a sonogram, a tiny, blurry, black and white image of a 12-week fetus, curled up in the static of the ultrasound waves. I stared at it, confused for a fraction of a second, and then my eyes drifted to the stark black text printed cleanly across the top border of the glossy medical image. The words made the blood instantly freeze in my veins. Patient, Quinn Gallagher. Partner, Wyatt Vance. I fell backward out of the SUV. I hit the hard concrete floor of the garage and sat back on my heels. The sweltering heat vanished, replaced by a sudden violent cold sweat that drenched my shirt. The air felt like wet wool. I could hear the high-pitched, drone-in buzz of a lawnmower 3 houses down, but it sounded like it was underwater. My stomach plummeted so violently I physically gagged. I clapped my hand over my mouth, fighting the sudden intense urge to vomit onto the concrete. Wyatt was having a child, with another woman, and Yvonne knew. Yvonne wasn't just aware, she was actively participating. She was hiding the incriminating medical paperwork in her car to keep it away from our house. They were all in on it. They were all laughing at me behind my back. I sat completely paralyzed on the dirty concrete floor for 20 solid minutes. My mind was a chaotic screaming tornado. My very first primal instinct was to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to march into the house, throw the glossy photo directly into his lying face, smash every dish in the kitchen cupboards, and burn his expensive suits on the front lawn for the entire neighborhood to see. But then, cutting through the deafening roar of my panic, Mrs. Quincy's raspy, smoke-stained voice echoed crystal clear in my head. A cornered animal doesn't cry. It waits for the cage to open. I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. The smell of gasoline grounded me. If I confronted him right now, in this garage, I had absolutely nothing. I was utterly powerless. My name wasn't on the rental lease for the house. My rusty Civic was practically dead and wouldn't make it past the county line. I had zero savings in my own name. Wyatt made 6 figures. He would immediately kick me out onto the street, take Ivy, and use his expensive, ruthless lawyers to prove to a judge that I was a destitute, unfit mother who groomed dogs for minimum wage. I would lose my daughter. I slowly stood up. My knees popped. I didn't confront him. I carefully slid the sonogram back into the envelope and shoved it deep under the passenger seat, exactly where I had found it. I finished cleaning the car, vacuuming every last crumb. I walked inside the house. The air conditioning hit my sweat-soaked skin like ice. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, watching the dark grease swirl down the drain. I pulled a pound of ground beef from the fridge, mixed it with breadcrumbs and ketchup, and cooked him his favorite meatloaf for dinner. When he walked through the door at 6 o'clock, complaining about traffic, I turned around and smiled at him. A warm, loving, perfect smile, and the invisible war officially began. The escalation of Wyatt's cruelty over the next 3 months was a terrifying, systematic masterclass in psychological torture. He wasn't just being mean, he was executing a strategy. He was actively trying to break my mind. He was trying to force me to have a mental breakdown and leave voluntarily so he wouldn't look like the villain who abandoned his loyal wife and asthmatic daughter for a younger woman. Beat 1 happened just 5 days after I found the sonogram. We were having a rare Sunday dinner at Yvonne's cramped, heavily perfumed apartment. Wyatt was drinking heavily, already on his 4th IPA. I was physically exhausted, my shoulders aching from a brutal 10-hour shift lifting heavy dogs into the bathing tubs. "God, you smell like wet dog, Zola," Wyatt said loudly, his voice cutting through the quiet dining room. He dropped his fork onto his plate with a loud clatter. I froze, my own fork hovering halfway to my mouth. My stomach tightened. "I showered right after work, Wyatt. I scrubbed twice." Yvonne laughed. It was a sharp, grating nasal sound that scraped against my eardrums. "You can't wash off poor Wyatt," she said, swirling her wineglass. "I told you that exact thing when you first met her. It's in her pores. Someone has to do the peasant work in society, I guess." I looked at Wyatt, waiting for him to defend his wife, waiting for him to tell his sister to shut her mouth. He didn't. He smirked, his eyes cold and empty, and took a long sip of his beer. "Yeah, well, charity cases take a lot of upkeep. I guess I'm learning that the hard way." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Excuse me," I whispered, standing up and taking my plate to the sink. Beat 2 was the isolation and control phase. He started restricting my physical movements. He claimed there was a string of burglaries in the neighborhood and demanded I hand over my copy of the house key. "You lose everything, Zola," he said, standing squarely in the kitchen doorway, physically blocking my exit to the backyard. His broad shoulders filled the frame. "You're scattered. You're irresponsible. I don't want you losing the key at that stupid dog clinic and letting some junkie into my house." "I have never lost a key in my entire life, Wyatt," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "What if there's an emergency with Ivy?" "I said give it to me," he demanded, stepping closer, towering over me. I handed it over. The metal was warm from my pocket. The very next day, he conveniently forgot to leave the back door unlocked when he left for work. I came home with Ivy to find us locked out. The Memphis heat was 94 degrees. The humidity was suffocating. I sat on the splintering wooden steps of the back porch with Ivy for 3 agonizing hours, fanning her with a piece of junk mail as she sweat through her clothes, until he finally pulled into the driveway. "Why didn't you just call a locksmith?" He sighed, acting exasperated as I carried a crying Ivy inside. "You always make yourself the victim, Zola. It's exhausting." Beat 3 was the replacement. He suddenly started taking Ivy to the park every Saturday morning. He had never done this before. When they returned, Ivy's little denim jacket would smell strongly of a very specific, expensive perfume, a heavy blend of vanilla and sandalwood. "Did you meet someone at the park?" I asked casually one afternoon, standing in the laundry room, folding his undershirts. Wyatt whipped around, his eyes flashing with genuine, unhinged rage. He snatched the shirt out of my hands. Stop interrogating me. I am trying to be a good father. I take her out of the house so you can sit around here doing absolutely nothing all morning, and this is the thanks I get? Be grateful, Zola. Stop being so intensely paranoid. Beat 4 was the public humiliation. It was Labor Day weekend. Wyatt's entire extended family was attending a massive barbecue at Shelby Farms Park. There were at least 40 people there, sitting at long wooden picnic tables beneath a large pavilion. The air smelled of roasting hot dogs, charcoal, and cheap beer. I was standing quietly by the red plastic cooler, digging through the ice to get Ivy a juice box. Yvonne walked up, flanked by 3 of her equally cruel cousins. You know, Zola, Yvonne said. Her voice was incredibly loud, perfectly projected to ensure the entire pavilion of family members could hear her. We were just taking bets at the other table on how long you'd actually stick around. I closed the cooler lid. The ice felt numb on my fingers. Excuse me? Wyatt loves bringing home strays, Yvonne continued, smiling a venomous red lipstick smile. He has a savior complex, but eventually the novelty wears off and you have to return the mud to the pound. We're betting you're gone by Christmas. Complete deafening silence fell over the picnic tables. Even the children stopped running. Wyatt was standing just 10 feet away by the smoking grill, a pair of metal tongs in his hand. I looked at him, silently begging him to intervene. He looked right back at me. And then he laughed. It wasn't a nervous chuckle, it was a loud, booming, genuine laugh. That laugh acted as a starting gun, giving everyone else in his family permission to chuckle along with the joke. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks like a sudden sunburn. My chest tightened so painfully I thought my ribs would snap. I wanted the earth to split open and swallow me whole, but I didn't cry. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a serene smile, handed Ivy her cold apple juice, and walked away with my spine perfectly straight. Beat 5 was the invasion of my personal space. I came home from a long Saturday shift to find my bedroom completely ransacked. My dresser drawers had been physically pulled out and dumped upside down onto the mattress. My underwear, my cheap shirts, my socks, everything was scattered in a chaotic pile. Sitting in the absolute center of the mess was a small, cheap, lacquered wooden jewelry box. It was chipped and worn. It was the only physical object I had left in the world from my biological mother. It held nothing of monetary value, just 3 tarnished plastic rings and a broken silver chain. I ran to the garbage can by the door. Wyatt had dumped the rings into the trash, burying them under wet coffee grounds and eggshells. He had taken the empty wooden box out to his workbench in the garage to hold spare, oily metal screws. It's just junk, Zola, he sighed heavily when I dug my hands into the wet coffee grounds to retrieve the rings. He leaned against the doorframe, sipping water. You hoard garbage. I needed a container. Stop being so intensely dramatic over literal trash. Beat 6 was the financial sabotage. It was a rainy Tuesday. Ivy had a terrible fever, and I had rushed to the local Kroger to buy infant Tylenol, Pedialyte, and a few groceries. My cart was full. I stood at the register, bouncing a crying Ivy on my hip, and swiped my joint debit card. The machine beeped loudly. A harsh red light flashed, declined. Try it again, I told the cashier, a teenage boy who looked incredibly bored. He sighed, typed something, and I swiped again. Declined. Cards cancelled, ma'am, he said loudly. The line of people behind me shifted impatiently. A woman cleared her throat. Panic seized my chest. I pulled out my phone and called Wyatt. He answered on the second ring. Wyatt, my card is declining at the grocery store. I'm trying to buy Ivy's medicine. Oh, yeah, he said, his voice dripping with casual indifference. I called the bank and cancelled it this morning. I noticed you've been spending too much on useless crap. I'm moving the money to a private account. Wyatt, please, I have a cart full of food and a sick kid. There are people staring at me. Then you better put the food back, Zola, he whispered darkly into the phone. Learn to budget. And he hung up. I had to look the cashier in the eye, my face burning with absolute shame, and tell him I couldn't pay. I walked out into the rain with nothing, carrying my sick daughter all the way home. Beat 7 was the ally attack. Yvonne cornered me in the driveway the following evening while Wyatt was inside showering. She grabbed my upper arm. Her sharp acrylic nails physically dug into my bicep, hard enough to leave crescent-shaped bruises. "You know he's going to leave you, right?" she hissed, leaning in close so I could smell the stale coffee on her breath. "He is absolutely disgusted by you. You're a leech. You're a parasite draining his bank account. Don't make it hard on yourself when he finally tells you to pack your trash bags. Just take the hint and disappear." Beat 8 was the institutional threat. I couldn't take it anymore. The walls were closing in. One night, while Wyatt was asleep, I quietly pulled a small duffel bag from the closet. I started packing 3 pairs of pants for Ivy, a toothbrush, and some snacks. I was going to try and sneak out, sleep on the floor of the grooming salon for a few days, and figure out a plan. I zipped the bag. The metal teeth made a loud zip sound in the quiet room. The bedroom light flicked on. Wyatt was standing there, in his boxers, his chest heaving. He didn't yell. That was the terrifying part. He walked over slowly, his bare feet silent on the carpet. He gently took the bag from my trembling hands. He looked at it for a second, and then he hurled it with all his might against the drywall. It hit with a sickening thud, cracking the plaster. He stepped forward, backing me violently into the corner of the room until my spine hit the cold wall. He placed his hands on the wall on either side of my head, trapping me. "You listen to me very carefully," he hissed, his face mere inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "You ever try to take my daughter out of this house? I will call Child Protective Services before your car even starts. I will tell them I found crystal meth hidden in your bathroom vanity. I will tell them you suffer from violent psychotic breaks. And who do you think they'll believe? A respected 6-figure logistics manager with a spotless record and a beautiful home, or a damaged foster kid who washes muds for minimum wage? You will go to jail, Zola, and you will never ever see her again." My breathing stopped. The room spun. I knew he was right. The system always favored the powerful. I stopped packing. I unpacked the bag. I stayed. But Bit 9 was the cruelest. It was the moment the icy terror in my veins officially turned to absolute, unquenchable fire. Wyatt had taken Ivy to the zoo on a Sunday afternoon. They were supposed to be back by 3. They came back at 6. When they walked through the front door, Ivy was unusually quiet. She didn't run to me. She didn't show me her coloring books. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, walked straight to her bedroom, climbed into her bed, and hid entirely under her heavy fleece blankets. When I went in an hour later to change her into her pajamas, I gently pulled the blanket back. I slipped her t-shirt over her head, and then I saw it. 4 dark, perfectly formed finger-shaped bruises wrapping aggressively around her upper left arm. The skin was mottled purple and angry red. My heart completely stopped in my chest. All the sound in the room vanished, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The world tilted on its axis. I reached out with a trembling hand and touched the marks gently. Ivy flinched violently, pulling her arm back. Giant tears welled in her big brown eyes. "What happened, baby?" I whispered, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words. "Baby, who did this?" Wyatt suddenly appeared, leaning casually against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. He was holding a cold beer. "She fell on the playground equipment," he said loudly, taking a sip. "She's clumsy. She wasn't paying attention. Stop coddling her, Zola. You're making her weak." He turned and walked down the hallway toward the living room. The television flicked on. I leaned down, pressing my face close to Ivy's ear. I could smell the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Ivy," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Look at Mommy. Did you fall on the playground?" She looked at the door to make sure Wyatt was gone. Then she shook her head. It was a tiny, terrified, jerky movement. She leaned forward, wrapping her small, trembling arms around my neck, and whispered directly into my ear. "The new Mommy got mad," she sniffled, a tear dropping onto my collarbone. "I spilled my apple juice on the seat in her car. She yelled really loud and grabbed my arm really hard. Daddy saw. Daddy told me I wasn't allowed to tell you, or I'd be in big trouble." I closed my eyes. The rage that exploded inside my chest in that exact moment wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming, thrashing temper tantrum. It was entirely silent. It was a cold, absolute, terrifying certainty. It settled deep into my bones like liquid nitrogen. They hadn't just humiliated me. They hadn't just stolen my money and my pride. They had put their hands on my child. That was beat 10. The final beat, the breaking point. I didn't storm into the living room and hit him. I didn't call the police. Calling the police without hard, irrefutable proof would just trigger his CPS threat, and I would lose her forever. Instead, I tucked Ivy into bed, kissed her forehead, and walked into the living room. I sat on the couch next to Wyatt, watched a mindless sitcom for an hour, and went to sleep. The next morning, while Wyatt was at work, I took the morning off from the grooming salon. I drove to a massive specialty electronics store in downtown Memphis. I walked straight to the security aisle. I spent exactly $84.12, money I had secretly, meticulously saved in a hollowed out tampon box under the bathroom sink for 3 months, on a state of the art micro voice activated audio recorder. It was no bigger than a quarter. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table. I took Ivy's absolute favorite stuffed animal, a ratty, drool-stained brown bear named Mr. Barnaby, that she carried everywhere she went. Using a razor blade, I carefully sliced open the thick seam running down the bear's back. I pushed the tiny recorder deep inside the synthetic cotton stuffing, right next to the bear's plastic heart. I threaded a needle and sewed the seam perfectly shut with invisible, microscopic stitches I had learned from repairing dog collars. What Wyatt, Yvonne, and the pregnant Quinn didn't know was that for 47 agonizing days before that horrible freezing night at the gas station, I was meticulously building an ironclad criminal case. I became the ghost I was trained to be in the foster system. I faded into the wallpaper. I agreed with everything Wyatt said. I cooked his meals. I washed his clothes. And every single night, after Wyatt had drank himself to sleep and his heavy rhythmic snoring echoed down the hallway, I would creep into Ivy's room. I would take Mr. Barnaby to the locked master bathroom. I would sit on the cold tile floor, carefully snip the stitches, extract the tiny micro SD card, and plug it into a cheap tablet I kept hidden under the towels. I listened to hours and hours of crystal clear audio. I heard Wyatt and Quinn talking intimately in her upscale apartment. I heard the clinking of wine glasses. I heard them discussing, in sickening detail, the extravagant baby shower Yvonne was planning for them at the country club. I heard Wyatt laughing. Zola is such a pathetic parasite. His recorded voice echoed in the tile bathroom, sending shivers down my spine. She's too stupid to realize what's happening. She's just a maid at this point. And then I heard Quinn's voice, high-pitched, whiny, and cruel. I'm sick of waiting, Wyatt. Just drop her off in a bad neighborhood, kick her out of the car, and change the house locks while she's walking home. She's garbage. Treat her like it. I want her gone before the baby comes. I didn't cry. I systematically saved every single audio file. I named them by date and time. I backed them up to a hidden encrypted cloud drive. Then I would sew the bear back up, place it next to Ivy's sleeping head, and go to bed. But I knew audio wasn't enough. In a court of law, a slick lawyer could argue it was fabricated or taken out of context. I needed visual proof of his abuse and his affair. That's where my secret ally came in. Mr. Henderson lived 3 houses down the street. He was a 72-year-old retired police dispatcher who spent his days sitting on his front porch, smoking a pipe, and meticulously watering his pristine rose bushes. He had always been incredibly kind to me, occasionally slipping Ivy a cherry lollipop when Wyatt wasn't looking, offering a warm smile when I walked by, looking exhausted. One hazy Tuesday afternoon, while Wyatt was at work, I walked over to Mr. Henderson's porch. I sat down on his wooden steps. I looked the old man directly in the eye, and for the first time in years, I told someone the absolute truth. I told him everything. The affair, the financial control, the threats, and then I rolled up Ivy's sleeve and showed him the fading yellow and purple bruises on her arm. Mr. Henderson didn't gasp. He didn't offer empty pity. His jaw tightened, the pipe clamped firmly in his teeth. He looked at the bruises, and then he looked at me. He offered logistics. Wyatt leaves his truck unlocked in the driveway on weekends. Mister. Henderson said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He tapped his pipe against the railing. I have an old high-definition dashboard camera from my days on the force. It's motion-activated, runs on a long-life battery. It records video and audio straight to a paired tablet via a localized signal. I'll install it behind the rearview mirror tonight at 3 a.m. The wires will be tucked into the headliner. He never cleans the inside of that truck. He'll never see it. If he catches you, I started. I survived 2 tours in Vietnam and 30 years at the Memphis PD. Mr. Henderson grunted. A punk in a suit doesn't scare me. Give me the spare tablet. He installed it that night. For 3 weeks I had a front row, high-definition seat to Wyatt's double life. I had crystal clear video of him kissing Quinn in the passenger seat. I had audio of him explicitly planning to drain our joint checking account the week before Christmas. I had video of him laughing as Yvonne mocked my clothes. And most importantly, behind the scenes, I had fiercely protected my treasure. Over the course of a month, I slowly, methodically smuggled the essentials out of the house. I took Ivy's original birth certificate, my social security card, her immunization records, and $400 in cash I had saved from tips at the grooming salon. I took them across town to Mrs. Quincy's house. She didn't ask questions. She just took the manila envelope, opened her heavy fireproof steel floor safe, and locked my life away. The cage is opening, Zola, Mrs. Quincy told me on my very last visit, patting my hand with her warm, wrinkled fingers. The smell of menthol smoke surrounded us. Make sure you break the damn hinges when you walk out. Everything was perfectly set. The trap was laid. I was just waiting for Wyatt to make one final, fatal mistake, and he made it on that freezing, torrential, rainy Tuesday night in late November. Ivy had a severe asthma attack around 1 a.m. It was triggered by the heavy black mold growing inside the air vents of the cheap rental house, a problem Wyatt had refused to fix to save money. I woke up to the sound of her gasping. It was a terrifying wet rattle. I panicked. I screamed at Wyatt to wake up, to grab his keys, to drive us to the emergency room because my Civic's battery had completely died in the freezing cold. He was furious. He was supposed to be spending the night at Quinn's apartment, but Yvonne had called him in a panic and forced him to come home because the neighbors were asking questions about his truck being gone all night. He was hungover, angry, and exhausted. "She's faking it!" he roared, throwing the blankets off. "You're both hysterical. Look at her lips, Wyatt. She needs oxygen." He shoved us violently out the front door and into the truck, swearing at the top of his lungs. The rain was coming down in sheets. He drove erratically, speeding down the wet roads, screaming that I was an idiot, that I was ruining his life, that he couldn't wait to be rid of us. He pulled hard into the flickering Shell station, the tires skidding on the wet concrete. "Get out and buy her some water to calm her down," he snapped, pointing at the convenience store doors. I stepped out of the truck, the freezing wind instantly cutting through my thin t-shirt. And that's when he reached across the console, grabbed Ivy by the collar of her fleece pajamas, and physically shoved her out into the pouring rain with me. "Let go of the door or I'll break your fingers," he yelled, his face contorted in pure rage. "You and the brat are not my problem anymore." He kicked my shin. He threw her blue rescue inhaler directly into the trash can, and he drove away into the dark. I sat on the freezing concrete, rocking my gasping daughter as the rain soaked us to the bone. I didn't have my phone, I didn't have a car, but beneath the terror of Ivy's breathing, a warm glowing ember of absolute triumph ignited in my chest. Because I knew exactly what was happening, Mr. Barnaby was safely tucked inside Ivy's pink backpack, recording every terrifying wheeze. And the hidden dashcam was rolling, every single word of his threat, the violent physical shove, the visual of him walking to the trash can to throw away a life-saving medical device. It was all recorded in high definition and beamed directly to the tablet sitting safely on Mr. Henderson's coffee table. The teenage gas station attendant saw us through the glass and immediately called 911. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes with sirens wailing. Paramedic Luis found the inhaler in the trash. They strapped an oxygen mask to Ivy's face, gave her an emergency albuterol breathing treatment in the back of the brightly lit rig, and rushed us to the hospital. We spent the entire night in the pediatric ward. The room smelled of sharp antiseptic and clean linens. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. At 8 a.m., the hospital's pediatric social worker, a stern woman with glasses, came into the room. She tried to call Wyatt's cell phone 3 times. He sent every call to voicemail. When she finally tracked down Yvonne's number and called her, Yvonne gave the Oscar worthy performance of a lifetime. Oh my God! Yvonne gasped loudly over the phone, ensuring the social worker heard her panic. Zola took the baby? Officer, please listen to me. Zola has severe untreated mental health issues. She's heavily on drugs. Wyatt has been absolutely terrified she would run away in the middle of the night and hurt the child. Please, I beg you, keep the child there under lock and key. Wyatt is on his way with his lawyer right now to take emergency custody. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally perfectly framed me as the unstable, drug-addicted runaway mother. Wyatt arrived at the hospital 3 hours later. He was wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt. He looked frantic, sweating, playing the victim perfectly for the nurses. He rushed into the room, ignoring me completely, and hugged the confused Ivy. I didn't fight him. When he told the social worker I was a danger to the child and demanded to take Ivy home, I just sat in the plastic hospital chair, staring blankly at the wall. I let him take her. I let him walk out of the hospital doors, knowing that he thought he had successfully painted me into an inescapable corner. He thought I was broken. I checked myself out of the hospital an hour later. I walked 3 miles in the freezing cold to Mrs. Quincy's house. She opened the door, took one look at my bruised face, and ushered me inside. I slept on her lumpy guest bed for 2 straight days. I let him enjoy his victory for exactly 2 weeks. I let him feel safe. I waited patiently until the second Saturday in December. The setting was the Magnolia Room at the East Memphis Country Club. Yvonne had maxed out 2 credit cards to rent the extravagant ballroom for Wyatt and Quinn's lavish baby shower. It was an obscenely expensive, ridiculous affair. There were massive towering arches of pastel green and gold balloons framing the doorway. There was a 3-tiered chocolate fountain, crystal mimosa towers, catered crab cakes, and 70 well-dressed guests. The guest list included Wyatt's entire extended family, his college fraternity brothers, and most importantly, all of his upper-level corporate bosses from the logistics firm. Wyatt had told everyone I was currently locked away in a dual diagnosis rehab facility in Florida. He played the tragic, resilient, single father perfectly, except in sympathetic pats on the back from his coworkers. I arrived in an Uber at exactly 1:45 p.m. I wasn't wearing ripped flannel pajamas or smelling of wet dog. I was wearing a sharp, tailored, elegant black dress I had bought at a high-end thrift store and had professionally dry cleaned. I wore black heels. My hair was styled perfectly straight. I wore minimal makeup. As I walked up the sweeping concrete steps of the country club, I felt completely, terrifyingly calm. My heart rate was a steady, rhythmic drum. I walked past the bewildered hostess, who tried to ask for my invitation, and pushed open the heavy oak doors to the massive ballroom. The air inside smelled of expensive floral perfumes, roasted garlic, and champagne. Peak smugness is a very dangerous thing. Wyatt was standing at the front of the room on a small riser. He was wearing a tailored, light blue linen suit, holding a microphone. Quinn was sitting next to him in a massive peacock-style wicker chair, wearing a flowing white maternity dress, looking like a glowing, smug fertility goddess. I just want to thank every single one of you for being here today, Wyatt was saying into the microphone, his voice thick with perfectly faked, trembling emotion. It's been a really hard, dark year, but standing here today, with Quinn by my side, I finally feel like I have a real family, a safe family, and I can't wait for our son to meet all of you. The room erupted into warm applause. Yvonne, standing near the mimosa table, dramatically wiped a fake tear from her heavily powdered cheek. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I walked silently along the back wall, slipping past the catering staff, until I reached the AV table where a hired DJ was managing the music and the slideshow of baby photos projecting onto a massive screen behind Wyatt. The DJ, a young kid with headphones around his neck, looked up at me, confused. I smiled warmly, reached into my clutch, and handed him a crisp $50 bill along with a sleek black USB flash drive. Emergency slide edition from the sister, I whispered smoothly, projecting the tone of urgent excitement. She wants it played right now, as a surprise. The DJ nodded, pocketed the cash, plugged the drive into his laptop, and clicked the single video file sitting in the main folder. The massive projector screen behind Wyatt suddenly went completely black. The soft, acoustic background music abruptly cut out. The ballroom fell into a confused silence. People murmured, looking at the screen. And then, the crystal clear audio of Wyatt's truck cab echoed through the massive ballroom speakers at maximum volume. "You're a pathetic parasite, Zola. God, I can't wait to dump you and that defective brat in the gutter." The entire ballroom froze. 70 people stopped breathing simultaneously. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wyatt whipped around, staring up at the screen. His jaw went slack. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. It was like watching a ghost possess a mannequin. The audio continued, booming off the crystal chandeliers. It was Quinn's voice this time, unmistakable and shrill. "Just drop her off in a bad neighborhood and change the locks. She's garbage, Wyatt. Treat her like it." Quinn gasped loudly. She dropped her delicate porcelain plate of cake. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into a dozen pieces, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Then the video kicked in. It was the high-definition dashcam footage from the freezing gas station. The screen illuminated the dark, rainy night. It showed Wyatt, clearly identifiable in the headlights, physically shoving my tiny 5-year-old daughter out of the truck and into the freezing downpour. The audio was undeniable, synced perfectly with his violent movements. "Let go of the door, or I'll break your fingers. You and the brat are not my problem anymore." The crowd began to murmur in horror. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. And then the grand finale played. The camera angle shifted slightly as Wyatt stepped back. The video clearly showed him walking to the metal trash can, pulling the bright blue asthma rescue inhaler out of his coat pocket, looking directly at it, and deliberately dropping it into the garbage before running back to the truck and speeding away. Total, absolute, unmitigated chaos erupted in the Magnolia Room. Wyatt's mother shrieked, clutching her chest. His corporate boss, a stern, silver-haired man named Mr. Davis, stood up slowly, his face flushed red, looking at Wyatt with absolute, unmasked disgust. Yvonne lunged toward the AV table, her heels slipping on the polished wood, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Turn it off! Turn it off right now! It's fake! It's AI!" But before she could reach the laptop, before the DJ could even touch the keyboard, the heavy double oak doors of the ballroom swung wide open. 4 fully uniformed Memphis police officers walked into the room, their radios crackling in the tense air. Mr. Henderson hadn't just helped me install the camera, he had also taken the raw footage of Wyatt violently throwing away a prescribed life-saving medical device during an active asthma attack directly to his old buddies at the precinct. He had walked it right up to the captain's desk. "Wyatt Vance?" the lead officer said, his deep voice easily cutting through the screaming, chaotic crowd. Wyatt dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden riser with a deafening, high-pitched electronic screech that made several guests cover their ears. He raised his hands instinctively, his knees physically trembling so violently they shook the fabric of his linen trousers. It's out of context," Wyatt stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead, soaking the collar of his expensive shirt. "She's crazy. My wife is crazy. She set me up. I didn't know she was sick." The officer wasn't listening. He unclipped his handcuffs. The metallic clack of the steel was the loudest sound in the room. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back, Mr. Vance. You're under arrest for reckless endangerment of a minor, felony child neglect, and domestic assault." As they roughly pulled his arms behind his back and clicked the cuffs into place, right in front of his sobbing new girlfriend, his horrified family, and his furious bosses, I stepped out from the shadows of the back wall. I walked slowly, deliberately, straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. They stared at me in awe and terror. Quinn was sobbing hysterically, pushing Wyatt away in disgust as he desperately tried to lean toward her to speak. Yvonne was backed against the mimosa table, her hands clutching the linen tablecloth, looking at me like I was a literal demon that had crawled up out of the earth to drag her to hell. I stopped right in front of Wyatt as the officers began to march him toward the exit. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a primal, desperate terror I had never seen before. The arrogant, powerful man who had tortured me for months was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic, shivering shell. I looked at him, and I smiled. It wasn't a malicious smirk. It was a small, warm, incredibly genuine smile. The smile of a woman who had just watched the lock on her cage click open. "Looks like you finally got your real family together, Wyatt," I said quietly, my voice perfectly steady. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to hear his excuses. I turned around, the fabric of my dress swishing around my legs, and walked straight out of the country club doors and into the bright, crisp, freezing December air. The aftermath was a glorious, unstoppable cascade of destruction that Wyatt could never have prevented. Within 2 weeks, his entire meticulously crafted life was completely, utterly dismantled. Because he was considered a flight risk with a documented history of child endangerment and abandonment, the judge flatly denied his initial request for bail. He spent Christmas morning sitting in a cold concrete cell in the county lockup, eating a stale bologna sandwich. Quinn left him immediately. She realized the money and the lifestyle were gone. She packed up her apartment, took every single expensive gift from the ruined baby shower, blocked his number, and moved back to Atlanta to live with her parents without leaving a forwarding address. His company fired him before the weekend was over. The logistics firm had a very strict morality and criminal conduct clause in their executive contracts, and Mr. Davis had seen more than enough on that projector screen to make the termination immediate, public, and permanent. They stripped his pension and his company car, but Yvonne's spectacular fall from grace was, without a doubt, my absolute favorite part of the entire ordeal. Remember the hidden audio recordings from Mr. Barnaby? In one of the late-night conversations I captured, Yvonne was drunkenly bragging to Wyatt about how she was helping him secretly pay for Quinn's luxury apartment. She wasn't using her own savings. She admitted in explicit detail that she had been skimming cash copays from the wealthy patients at the high-end dental clinic where she worked, altering the ledger to cover her tracks. I didn't go to the police with that specific recording. That would have been too quick. Instead, I created an anonymous email address and sent the audio file directly to the personal inbox of the head dentist who owned the clinic. Yvonne was fired on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, the clinic's lawyers had filed massive grand larceny and fraud charges against her. With her reputation destroyed and her bank accounts frozen, she lost her expensive apartment and was forced to move into a cheap, roach-infested motel on the industrial outskirts of the city. Wyatt tried to call me from the jail 3 times. I ignored the first 2 calls, letting the automated voice echo in my empty kitchen. The last time, I pressed the green button and answered. "Zola, please!" Wyatt begged through the static-filled line. His voice was cracking, hoarse from crying. He sounded so incredibly small. He sounded pathetic. "Please, Zola, I'm so sorry. I was stressed. I was out of my mind with the pressure at work. You know I love Ivy. You know I'd never really hurt her. Please, just call the DA. Tell them you want to drop the charges. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding." I listened to him cry for about 10 seconds. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. It was, without exaggeration, the sweetest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. "The cage is open, Wyatt," I said softly, tracing a finger over the kitchen counter. "Enjoy the inside of yours." And I hung up. I called my cell provider and permanently changed my phone number the very next morning. I filed for divorce and was granted full, uncontested legal and physical custody of Ivy, with 0 visitation rights for Wyatt. The family court judge took exactly 1 look at the dashcam footage of him throwing the inhaler away, shook his head in disgust, and signed the protective order without a single moment of hesitation. Wyatt was ordered to pay child support from his rapidly dwindling savings for the next 13 years. It's been almost 2 years since that terrifying night at the gas station. I don't work at Paws and Claws anymore. I don't come home smelling like wet corn chips and bleach. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, helped me navigate the paperwork to secure a small business loan. I bought a used, high-end Mercedes Sprinter van and converted it into my own mobile pet grooming business. I set my own hours. I choose my own clients. I am my own boss, and I make 3 times what I used to. Ivy and I moved out of that mold-infested rental house. We live in a small, safe, brightly lit two-bedroom apartment in a quiet tree-lined neighborhood in Midtown. The floors don't creak. There are no heavy, angry boots stomping down the hallway at 3 in the morning. There is no yelling. There is no fear. Last Sunday, it was raining. Not a violent, freezing thunderstorm, but the kind of soft, gentle, continuous Memphis rain that washes the dust off the streets and makes the oak trees look impossibly bright green. I was standing in our small, warm kitchen, holding a wooden spoon, stirring a large glass bowl of cheap, boxed brownie mix. The smell of artificial chocolate filled the apartment. Ivy was sitting on the granite counter next to me, swinging her legs in her clean pajamas, laughing out loud as she tried to sneak a glob of chocolate off the spoon with her finger. I looked at her. Her chest was rising and falling with